Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome to our continued playthrough of Nevsky, Teutons Rus and Collision 1240 to 1242, designed by Volko Ruhnke and published by GMT Games. In this episode, we're going to start the second half of the 1240 summer scenario. So at this point, the conflict is dead even. Both the Teutonic forces and the Russians have achieved the same number of victory points. However, I think it's fair to say that the Teutonic forces have a pretty strong positional advantage. We're going to have to be a little bit creative to see if we can keep the Russians in this conflict. Let's jump back in and start with the levy for the second half of summer 1240. Let's start with a quick overview as we start into the back half of this conflict. Now, it's really divided up into two segments here, a northern segment and a southern segment. Let's take a look at the southern segment first. The south presents a lot of interesting decisions, I think, for both sides. Now, Gavrilo here is one of the Russian lords. He is in the Teutonic side of the map, which means he won't be able to muster new forces. Domash, however, here sits in Pskov. And the question is, what do we try to do as the Teutonic forces and the Russian forces? Herman here is relatively strong, as is Rudolf. Now, one of the thoughts I had was we can have one of them come down here to Izborsk and cut Gavrilo off and then try to isolate him with the other one. So kind of an anvil and a hammer, perhaps, to try to beat, because I think one-on-one, either Herman or Rudolf could beat Gavrilo. And wiping him out would give them one victory point. So the question is, how do we try to save Gavrilo as the Russians? Now, Volko Ruhnke, the designer, offered a thought that perhaps Gavrilo could continue going west and raid more and ravage the countryside and rack up points for the Russians that way, which seems like, if he's going to get cut off here, would be his only move. So we might try that, and then the question becomes, can Herman and Rudolf, working in conjunction, trap him in a situation where he can't retreat and then take him on one-on-one and try to eliminate him? So I think that's how the gameplay might play out in this southern sphere. The question mark is what the Russians might do with Domash, because with a significant muster, he might be a pretty good offensive force. And if both Herman and Rudolf are concentrating on Gavrilo, perhaps Domash could invade Teutonic lands and do some pretty serious damage too. So as you see, one of the things I like about this game is kind of its chess-like nature. One move seems to dictate quite a few different options that spawn off of it. And even with, which is probably the simplest scenario in the game, with a relatively short time span and a relatively limited number of lords, you can see that there's just a lot of kind of, well, if they do this, and ifs and and if-then type of thinking that kind of the gameplay spawns. So I've been really pleased with how intellectually entertaining the gameplay is in even this simplest scenario. Let's take a look at the north now. In the north, we have the Danish princes, Knud and Abel, and up here in Ladoga, we have Vladislav. Now, Vladislav is weaker than Knud and Abel. One-on-one, I think Knud and Abel has probably a pretty significant chance of winning that conflict straight up. So Vladislav has to somehow try to contain Knud and Abel's aggression. And they have a lot of different options they could go. They could go to Kaibolovo, or they could come down and drive, and Novgorod is down here to the southeast, just off the map, or they could perhaps even try to corner Vladislav and force him into some combat. Vladislav, however, one of the thoughts that Volko Ruhnke offered would be, if the Danish princes vacate Kaporia, where they are right now, perhaps Vladislav could sneak in behind them and retake it, negating some of their rampaging across the countryside. So a little bit of an interesting situation, and then the bigger backdrop is, where does each side emphasize their movements? Because again, we've got 3 lords. We can only have 6 activations in this current summer campaign. So a little bit of where are we going to place emphasis with our actions as well. So lots to think about as we head into the second half of the conflict here. And let's start now with the levy phase. The first thing we're going to do is pick 2 event cards for each side. We're going to pick for the Teutonic forces first. Now in the first levy, in the first turn, you pick these as capabilities, but every subsequent levy, you pick them as events. So we're going to look at the top half of the card. Here is the first Teutonic event. Famine. Ooh. This campaign, Russian supply adds maximum of 1 provender per command card from seats, and forage adds none. So famine strikes the land. I had a question as to whether this applied to all lords or just to Russian lords, and the background book fills in the gaps there for me, which says this does not affect Teutonic lords. It only impacts Russian lords, which means that they can't forage in their own country to add provender. That could be rather tricky. They'll have to use supply, which will be limited to 1 provender, and they can't forage. Now, it doesn't impact any kind of provender from spoils or from ravaging and other sources or by ships. But could impact the Russian play somewhat as we go through this campaign, as famine has struck the Russian countryside. Let's check now the second event. Field Organ. Oh, this was a fun one. May play on a lord in battle or storm. So we're going to hold this one for the Teutonic forces. In the first round of combat, Teutonic lords, this lord's knights, any lord that uses it, knights and sergeants, melee strike +1, which is pretty significant because knights in regular battle have a strike of 2, so to have them with 3, when I tried this before in a previous battle, they ended up with 9 strikes on the first round of combat, which basically just turned the tide of battle. So we are going to take the Teutonic field organ here, put it off to the side, and use it at its appropriate time in combat during this campaign. Let's see what the Russians get for events. 2 good ones for the Teutonic forces. Dietrich von Gröningen. On the calendar, shift Andreas or Rudolf or their service 1 box this levy. No muster or of or by them. What? Leads to order of curl. Oh, this is interesting. This seems epically powerful here because one of the things we were going to try to do with Rudolf, let's go take a look here. One of the things I was going to try to do with Rudolf was to have him use a Crusades event, a Crusades capability, to bring in these 2 knights into force, which would make his force extremely strong. Without them, and without the ability to use his lordship, he's going to kind of stay at the same weakened level. And we can also shorten his service by 1 season up here on the calendar. So let's take a look at that. So Rudolf's service was here to end in early winter, but as the Russians, it seems to make sense to shorten it now, which forces, let's get this straightened out here, which will force some kind of an action to keep him in service for the rest of this campaign. This could be a huge event for the Russians. Let's go to the second event. Osilian Revolt. On the calendar, Teutons choose to shift service of Andreas or Heinrich 2 boxes to the left. Well, neither Andreas or Heinrich are in this conflict, so I think that this just doesn't apply here. I don't think we do anything. I'll double check, but I think this is a no event in this circumstance. Yeah, this one seems to have no impact in this case, which is fortunate for the Teutonic forces. But they're going to have to solve this Dietrich von Gröningen event here that could impact Rudolf and could flip the whole campaign really here. Let's drive on. What a game-changing event this would be as we come to the pay part of the levy portion. So basically, because Rudolf's service marker has been shifted here, the Teutonic Order has to pay him either coin or loot to extend his service. However, Rudolf has no coin and he doesn't have any loot. That means another lord could pay them. So Hermann could pay or Nuden Abel could pay, but they have to be at the same friendly locale. Neither of them are, which means that Rudolf has to disband. This is devastating for the Teutonic Order. And in this event here, I just kind of looked it up, Dietrich von Gröningen event, is that this was an order leader who led another campaign to the west of Riga. So this depicts Rudolf and his forces being drawn away from our conflict to this Dietrich's conflict to help serve in that one. So as a result of that, Dietrich is removed from play. We can't extend his order. We have no way to do that because he has no money or coin and nobody else can pay it. So we take this off. We take Rudolf out of play and we put his marker 2 turns further into the future. But that means he's pretty much out of this conflict. A huge swing of events for the Russian forces. The other piece of this that I just realized is that because Rudolf has disbanded, by rules of this scenario, there's a special rule that anytime an enemy lord disbands, you get a victory point. So not only is Rudolf gone, but the Russians take a 3-2 lead in this campaign. The only other thing we're going to do during this pay phase here is Nuden Abel has some loot and they also have coin. They seem to be in really good shape. So just to eliminate any kind of worries, we're going to have them use one of their loot because they're at a friendly locale. They can pay themselves to extend his service just a little bit, just to be on the safe side here. They can definitely not afford to lose another one. The Russian lords are in pretty good shape. Vladislav really can't pay himself anything. We don't have any coin in the Novgorod Vechi to be able to pay them. And so nobody else really is going to pay to extend service. We could extend Gavrilo, but we could pay himself, but we're not going to because he seems to be in pretty good shape. And Domash is actually way over here, so he's fine. So the Russians are going to pass on that phase. Now let's go to the next part of the levy phase. Now we go to the mustering phase. We're going to start with Knud and Abel, the princes of Denmark. They have a lordship of 3. And with their lordship, we are going to do a couple of things. I want to give them a little bit more movement capability. They have a lot of provender, and I think they're going to be necessary now with Rudolf out to really kind of lean into Knud and Abel to see if they can do as much damage as possible. So we're going to add a cart for one lordship, a boat for another lordship, and then we're going to sign the Treaty of Stensby as a capability. And this says that Danish and Teutonic comity is enforced. Heinrich and Knud and Abel get command +1. So that will mean instead of having a command of 2, Knud and Abel will have a command of 3, which means that we can do 3 actions per command card with them instead of 2. And I'm hopeful that might make them more effective in the north, because I think we're really going to have to lean into both Knud and Abel and Hermann and have them really generate a lot of activity if the Teutonic Order is going to have any chance to win this. Alrighty, I'm not quite 100% sure what to do with Hermann here, but he has 3 lordship points. We're going to have him add 2 carts to give him a little bit more mobility with provender. I was thinking to perhaps draw in some other vassals, but I want to keep him at this 6 component limit so that we don't have to pay him 2 provender for mood, keeping him a little bit light. I'm also going to take a risk here. We're going to swap out Trebuchet for Raiders, because I think what we might do with Hermann is have him slash east and try to break free of the southern region and try to ravage and raid as much as he possibly can. So I think Raiders, which allows him to raid in an adjacent locale by trackway if there's no enemy lord there, might be a little bit more valuable than having Trebuchet, because I think he might not be in that big of a fixed combat situation anymore. So that gives us the end of the Teutonic Order muster. Let's go now to the Russian forces. So for Domash, I was thinking of having him levy some more troops, but I think what we're going to try to do is to increase his capabilities instead. He has a lordship of 2, so we're going to add 2 capabilities to him. The first is Luchniki, massed archers, which means his militia and light horse now have archery, and then we're also going to give him crossbows. So really kind of leaning into his archery capacity here. This means that his 2 men-at-arms will now have archery with a -2 to the target's armor. So I think with this type of kind of load now, I think Domash might be able to go head-to-head against Hermann, especially on the defensive, if he needed to. Now, Gavrilo is in enemy territory, so he can't muster, so we're going to skip over him and go to Vladislav. Vladislav is actually in kind of a bind here, and the reason is the famine, because he only has 1 provender at the moment, and he won't be able to forage, and which means he'll have to rely on supply, and he's only got 1 cart, so he doesn't have much transportation. So his ability to live off the land, which would normally be good in the summer, is quite impeded here by the fact that we've got a famine going on in Russia, which means that I was going to initially have him levy some troops here, to muster some troops from his vassals, and just provide 1 boat. But I think what we're going to do instead here is to try to get ahead of that logistical problem by having him create 2 more carts, which will give him 3 carts. And I think that's going to give him a little bit farther range away from his seat in Ladoga, where he is right now, so that he can potentially use those carts to bring provender down and to supply his moves as he moves across the Russian countryside. Otherwise, I think his troops would run out of food. I just don't see how he can feed himself with any other way. So I'm not even sure if this is going to work, but we're going to give it a try. So with that, we come to the end now of the muster phase. Let's go to the call to arms phase. All right, so in the call to arms phase for the Teutonic Order, we have William of Modena, and we're going to have him be he's going to show up here at Dorpat, which is the bishopric. And what he now can do is, he has a couple of, we could do some things with him right now, but one of the other things we could do is we can move him to a lord in a friendly locale and have him stay with that lord during the campaign, which will give the lord an extra command action each time he's activated. So here's the thought. So here's our thought. William is escorted to Kaporia and joins up with Knud and Abel, the two Danish princes. That will give them a command which was at the beginning of the phase as 2, now could go up by 1 because it's the Treaty of Stensby, which would mean 3. And if William's with them, they have 4 command actions, which potentially, with Vladislav's limitations, this might be the route to victory for the Teutonic Order in this campaign. We shall see. Let's go to the Russian call to arms phase. So in the Russian call to arms phase, they could expend this victory point down here at the Novgorod Vechi to kind of do a few actions, but I don't think any of them make sense. So we're not going to do that. So that call to arms is done. Now it's time for us to start the campaign phase by building the command deck. So we're going to do that now. So building that command deck using our special solitaire system here with only 2 lords is relatively straightforward. There still are some decisions to be made here. We're going to pick, the same rules apply basically, except that you're limited to the number of cards that you have. So we pick 3 definite cards. We're going to take 2 Hermans and a Knud and Abel, and we're going to place Herman first in the order. So we know he has a 50% chance to go first. We can't place Herman second because we can't place consecutive lords. We're going to place Knud and Abel second and then Herman third. Then we're going to take the remaining 3, which has 2 Knud and Abels and 1 Herman in it, and we're going to shuffle those up and put those face down for 4, 5, and 6. And then, as before, we're going to flip all the cards over. Then I'm going to shuffle 1 and 2, mix them up. I don't know which one is which. Then I'm going to shuffle 2 and 3, 3 and 4, 4 and 5, and 5 and 6. So I'll do that right now off camera. All right, so I've rearranged all those by shuffling, and now the command deck is set. And of course, with only 2 lords, there's 6 cards, so the amount of variability in the command deck for the Teutonic forces is in what order and when Herman and Knud and Abel are going to appear, because we know both of them are going to activate 3 times. So we're going to be able to move both of them 3 times. It's just more a matter of when they activate. Let's now consider the Russian command deck building. Now, for the Russians, we have some bigger choices, right? We have the capability here of Gavrilo probably to continue west relatively unimpeded. I think Herman would beat him in a one-on-one battle, but unless he gets trapped by Herman, and I think Herman's better move is going to be go east to try to score points, because this is a defensive move to try to prevent that, as well as the ability of Domash, who's relatively strong and has good transport and good provender, to start coming in from the west. Herman's outnumbered 2 to 1. I mean, he could beat either one of these, I think, individually, perhaps, but I think it makes sense to have both Gavrilo and Domash fairly active to really take advantage of this kind of this lack of balance that's built up now down here to the south. Because I think if we look up in the north here with Vladislav, because of the famine, he's a little bit limited his ability to get food. I mean, he'll be able to draw supply with the 3 cards, but even so, head to head, he doesn't match up against Knud and Abel. Knud and Abel, I think, will pretty much beat them in a head-to-head battle, more than likely. So with that in mind, I think our action is going to be, we're going to pick 2 Gavrilos and 1 Domash for our certain actions. And we're going to have, let's have Gavrilo go first. We want Domash to go second, and then Gavrilo to go third, so that they probably won't get trapped there. Then the question is, which one of the 2, we're going to eliminate 2 Vladislavs. Oh wait, we only eliminate 1 card. We're going to eliminate a Vladislav card, which leaves us with 5 cards left to pick. Now we're going to shuffle these 5 and randomly pick 3 from them. So Vladislav could potentially activate twice, but it's not, he won't activate 3 times, we know, which is, so as we're de-emphasizing him, more than likely he'll activate once, I suppose. All right, so here's our next 3 cards, randomly picked out of those 5 after eliminating that. And then I'm going to do the same shuffling of the cards. We're going to hide these going to shuffle 1 and 2, and I'll build 2 and 3, then I'll build the whole deck up, and we'll get that done. So I've shuffled those all up and created the decks. We now have both command decks ready to go. And just as an aside, I spent a whole episode doing this and talking about the system in episode 2 of this playthrough. To do this right now took me, for both decks, took me about 3 minutes. And probably a minute of that was figuring out which card was going to go where. So shuffling up the cards and putting them in order and stuff like that, it takes under a minute perhaps per side, maybe a minute to do per side. So it really isn't very time consuming, although we did, I didn't want to give that impression as we spent the whole the second episode talking about the system and building up the decks. But it goes really fast once you've done it once or twice. And with that, we are ready to start the action phase. We're going to end this episode here now, as this one's gone on for quite a while. We will come back, and when we do, the Teutonic Order will draw their first card. It's going to be either Hermann or Newton Abel, as we know, and we're going to get this campaign underway. That the disbanding of Rudolf, having been drawn away to the campaign of the kind of the events of Dietrich von Gröningen there, a huge event for the Russian forces, not to mention that Russia is having a famine, so they won't be able to forage, which is going to impact Vladislav up here in particular in the north, where he will be somewhat limited in terms of how he can draw provender for his movements, which dictated a little bit of a change in play. So 2 pretty significant events here dictating some changes in gameplay as we go into this second and final campaign in this scenario. I'll put a link up above here right to the next episode as soon as it's ready. Love to hear your comments and thoughts as we go forward, and as always, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in our next episode.